Welcome to KSP in Real Solar System. I thoroughly enjoy this game and had a great time creating this video. Over the next hour, I want to share with everyone my journey to Mars and back. For the entire duration of this mission, I'd never used the infinite fuel cheat. When I first started playing Real Solar System, I spent about a week unlearning many of my bad habits I had picked up from the stock game. My first goal was to reach low Earth orbit in career mode. I spent about 2 weeks figuring out how to accomplish this. Over the next month, I sent probes to the Moon, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. Around this time, I really wanted to start planning a mission to Mars and back with a live crew. Before I could do this in career mode, I first wanted to attempt it in the sandbox mode. Going to Mars proved to be extremely challenging. Subtle design flaws proved catastrophic to the success of the mission. Ultimately, after 25 days of designing, redesigning, tweaking, and incremental mission successes, I finally brought my crew back to Earth alive after they had visited the Martian surface. Best of all, I did this without relying on infinite fuel. I wanted to document my journey in this video and describe my mission plan and spacecraft designs. This video is long, but I provided links in the description so you can skip sections that don't interest you. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Before we begin, I wanted to take a few minutes to discuss some of the challenges faced when planning a mission to Mars. Unlike stock KSP, a spacecraft requires at least 9,400 meters per second delta V to reach low Earth orbit. This requirement alone greatly affects one's ability to transfer to other planets. I was able to design a single rocket with about 20K of delta V at launch, but the payload was about half a ton. This is nowhere near the payload tonnage I will need to make it to Mars. Most engines do not throttle at all. Most of the remaining don't throttle below 80%. Lack of throttling plus atmospheric drag make flipping of a rocket much more likely, especially at max Q. Most engines can only be started once. This includes all but a few high-thrust engines. This really significantly limits engine choices for missions beyond Earth's sphere of influence. Ullage refers to the empty space in a container. In the vacuum of space, fuel floats around. Since fuel pumps are near the engines, they may not be able to suck up any fuel. Fortunately, one just needs to provide a little constant forward acceleration so fuels move near the fuel pumps. Realistic fuels like liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen require extremely cold temperatures to remain in liquid form. However, even space is not cold enough. These fuels will boil off in space. In real life, gases are released to prevent tank rupture. The game simulates this by slowly lowering delta V over time. When transferring to other planets, it's best to use storable fuels that don't boil off. Just keep in mind that most of the engines that use storable fuels have pretty low thrust. Ullage isn't just a problem in space, though. As a rocket is ascending in Earth's atmosphere during launch, its acceleration is even accelerating. When the current stage's engine uses up all of its fuel, the atmospheric drag causes acceleration to decrease rapidly enough for the fuel in the tank of the next stage to move to the top of the tank and away from the fuel pumps. The next stage engines will not be able to ignite. We all know that Earth orbits around the Sun and that the Earth rotates on a tilted axis. Due to fundamental game mechanics, KSP does not simulate a tilted axis as one would expect. All planets in KSP solar system have no tilt. To simulate a tilt, Real Solar System has the orbits of all the planets around the Sun on a different inclination than the Earth's equator. If you launch into low Earth orbit and are parallel to the equator, all planets, including the Moon, will be at a different inclination. you'll have to spend additional delta V to match the inclination of the other planets, which is very wasteful. This means that on launch, if we end up in a low Earth orbit with a similar inclination to the Moon, we will be in a good position to transfer to other planets. When launching to low Earth orbit, the ascent profile is more realistic than the stock game. In real solar system, you tend to start turning east immediately on takeoff. Pitching over early does require sufficient TWR values on the first few stages in order to reach orbit. If TWR is too low, one will remain in altitudes with air resistance much longer than desirable. Additional delta V will have to be expended. If TWR is too high, then the rocket may flip, wobble, or simply explode from too much acceleration. Regardless, payload fairings are required. The atmospheric stresses are too great, and payloads will break up without them. Before we design a mission plan, we must first determine how much delta V we will need. Most fuel will be consumed during 3 distinct phases of the mission. Number 1, transferring to Mars. Number 2, leaving the Martian surface to achieve low Mars orbit. And number 3, transferring back to Earth. We will not have to expend very much fuel when we arrive at Mars, because we will use the Martian atmosphere to perform an aero capture maneuver. Touching down on the Martian surface will not require much fuel either, because we will use parachutes. I also don't need to consider the cost of reaching low Earth orbit, because I plan to build the spacecraft in orbit before starting the journey to Mars. Let's use the transfer window planner to calculate delta V requirements for planetary transfers and flight duration so we know how much life support to bring. I need about 3,500 meters per second delta V to get to Mars. To return home, I need just over 2,000 meters per second delta V. Three to 4 years of life support ought to do it. So in review, I'm going to need about 3,200 delta V to transfer to Mars. I'm going to need about an additional 800 delta V to match Mars's orbital plane. After running some tests, I determined I needed about 4,100 delta V to leave the Martian surface. Finally, I need about 2,500 delta V to return back to Earth. That's over 11,000 delta V to complete the entire mission. Let's do a demo of the mission plan in low Earth orbit. Phase 1. Begin transfer to Mars. Recall that our mothership is in the same plane as the Moon's orbit around Earth. However, the Moon's orbit is slightly different from Mars. It is now time to use an aero capture maneuver to lower our apoapsis enough to prevent a flyby of Mars. Once a flyby is prevented, we will separate the service module and the lander. We need to deploy new solar panels. The old panels would have burned up in the previous aero capture maneuver. It is finally time to land on the Martian surface. After leaving the Martian surface, I need to rendezvous with the service module. We are ready to leave the Martian orbit. We need to wait for the next transfer window. This will take many days. Let's go home. Once we arrive at Earth, we will detach from the service module and re-enter the atmosphere in the command pod. Our mothership weighs over 300 tons. We must construct the mothership in low Earth orbit in pieces. This will require many separate rocket launches. In order for our engine to ignite, we must prevent rapid deceleration between stages. I prefer to ignite the next stage a little early so that we are still accelerating when the engine finally starts. To activate the stage early, we must reorganize the stage sequence for stages 2 and 3. We want our mothership to match the Moon's orbital plane. We must wait until the Moon reaches the correct position. Just a reminder, we are not sending the crew up yet. No need to consume life support resources. T-minus 20 seconds. T-minus 10 seconds. Engine ignition. We have liftoff. This rocket is quite heavy. Acceleration is minimal due to low SLT. Normally, we should pitch over very soon after liftoff. However, since our rocket has very low TWR, we need to ensure we gain sufficient altitude first. We are almost ready for the second stage. Second stage engines ignite early, so that first stage boosters are still supplying sufficient acceleration. First stage boosters are done. We can release them. To reach orbit, we ultimately have to pitch all the way to the horizontal. However, as you go horizontal, vertical velocity is reduced. As vertical velocity goes down, we will approach the apoapsis more quickly. We must not reach apoapsis until we've achieved Earth's orbital velocity. If we reach apoapsis too soon, we will have to waste fuel to pitch more vertical. Again, we ignite engines early. I had to pitch up since my TWR decreased from the previous stage to the current stage. We've reached Earth's orbital velocity. Only the apoapsis is high enough. We still need to raise the periapsis. Of course, the most fuel-efficient time to raise periapsis is at the apoapsis. We need to turn to face orbital prograde. We need to apply a small amount of delta V to raise our periapsis. We've reached low Earth orbit. Let's now match the Moon's inclination in order to set us up for a good transfer to Mars. We want to get our relative inclination to the moon as close to zero as possible. Just a few more RCS bursts. The mothership is in a stable orbit. Time to launch the other spacecraft to complete construction of the mothership. The next spacecraft to attach to the mothership is the small booster. I'm not going to show the entire launch. I just wanted to show that this rocket is much lighter and therefore accelerates quicker. We are in orbit, now to begin the lengthy task of rendezvousing with the mothership. I need to make sure I'm in the same inclination as the mothership. We are close to the mothership. Time to dock our small booster. I overshot a little, but I can recover. I want to shut down some engines so that I can accelerate more slowly. This will give me more precise control. Now I just need to align my craft and dock. This took more time than I expected. The problem I faced was that I only had one set of RCS thrusters located near the middle of my spacecraft. Unfortunately, as I applied any side-to-side motion, my nose would slowly start pointing in another direction. To overcome this, I should have attached at least two sets of RCS thrusters, one fore and one aft. That would allow side-to-side motion without affecting where the nose is pointing. Almost there. Maybe. Let's just push the other vessel into alignment. The final spacecraft to attach to the mothership is the large booster. Again, I will not show the entire launch into orbit, but you have to admit this is a very large rocket. That is a total of 6 boosters with the most powerful F1 series engines. The next stage is a whopping total of 9 Space Shuttle main engines. This rocket was pretty unstable up in the higher atmosphere. The high payload tonnage, as well as the long length of the payload, made this rocket pretty wobbly. I ultimately made it, but I don't think NASA would let rockets flex back and forth like this one did. We are close to the mothership. Let's dock the large booster. This time I have plenty of RCS thrusters. That was significantly easier. The construction of the mothership is complete. Now I just need to top off the fuel tanks. The large booster is already quite heavy. I should clarify that it's heavy even with an empty fuel tank. Let's transfer some fuel. I ended up launching 2 more refuelers to top off the tank. We are ahead of schedule. Need to wait for the optimal transfer window to Mars. Let's stop time a little before the transfer window. We still need to send up our brave Kerbals. Let the mission to Mars begin. This is a second playthrough of the launch. I forgot the crew the first time. It's time to temporarily dock our ferry. I created these 4 little life support pods to attach to the outside of the small booster. This was completely unnecessary, but I thought they looked pretty cool. These pods are completely independent little spacecraft. They have a flight controller, RCS thrusters, hydrazine, a docking port, and a battery to supply just enough power. One more pod to go. Okay, time for a spacewalk. We are putting the scientist in the lander and the pilot in the command pod. Now we will detach the ferry and wait for a little more than a day to transfer to Mars. It is finally time. Let's go. These are the most powerful engines I have to use storable fuels. Let's speed up time. This burn takes a while. I didn't quite use enough Delta V. I still have a little bit more to go. This phase is complete. The next burn will take place after we've left Earth's sphere of influence. Once we escape Earth's gravity and orbit the Sun, we can apply a correction burn to finalize our rendezvous path with the Mars system. The next significant burn is needed to align the orbital planes of the Mothership and Mars. In this case, I'm pointing to the anti-normal direction. Let's align the orbital planes. Again, this is a long burn. Let's speed up time. Here we are, lining up for a good Mars flyby. Just a few more tweaks to finalize the rendezvous path with Mars. Need one more maneuver to enter the Martian atmosphere at just the right angle for an aero capture. Too shallow and we will fly by. too steep and we will crash. Our goal is to orbit. Once in orbit, we will detach the lander and send it to the Martian surface. We have finally reached Mars. I'm going to detach the small booster at the last minute, since it is supplying life support. Just doing a quick systems check to see if I can transfer any resources off of the small booster before I detach it. At this point, I need to activate the life support on the service module, since I will no longer be able to use the life support pods from the small booster. I don't need the heat shield shroud anymore. I'm going to lose these 4 solar panels, but I do have 4 more in reserve. However, with no solar panels, I'm no longer producing power. I'm relying solely on battery capacity. The heat shield is starting to glow. Atmospheric drag will slow me down quite a bit, but I will have enough speed to escape the atmosphere and head back out into space. However, this time I will be in orbit. A flyby has been prevented. A flyby has been prevented. Notice we are gaining altitude. If Mars didn't have an atmosphere, I would have had to bring enough fuel to slow me down. You can imagine how heavy my mothership could have been. Probably would have been forced to modify the mission plan to send 2 separate spacecraft. Let's aerobrake again. I'd like to get the service module's orbital altitude as low as possible. This will lower our delta V requirements when we leave the Martian surface. It looks like we have enough battery in reserve. We can deploy our solar panels now. Let's put a Kerbal on the surface of Mars. Before sending the lander to the surface, I need to prevent the service module from re-entering the Martian atmosphere. I just need a little delta V to raise the periapsis. A short burst is all that is needed to stabilize my orbit. We can now focus on the lander. Down we go. We need to point retrograde. I can't detach the heat shield yet. During testing, it would slam back into the lander. On some occasions, the impact would destroy the vessel entirely. Even though I have 4 massive main chutes, the Martian atmosphere is too thin to slow my descent enough. A suicide burn is needed. My timing was a little bit off. Let's go plant our flag. It's time to leave and rendezvous with the orbiting service module. These solar panels cause a little bit of drag, but they're the type that can't be retracted. We need to move in close to the service module. I don't need to dock with the service module, I just need to get close enough to spacewalk over to it. Let's fast forward time to the transfer window back to Earth. We've achieved our goals in the Martian system. It's time to go home. This will be another long burn. Let's fast forward time. Here, I'm adjusting my rendezvous trajectory with the Earth. This will be my last major correction burn. Again, I need to tweak my re-entry angle. We've arrived near Earth. We can discard the service module so we can expose our heat shield for re-entry. We are no longer generating power, but we have enough battery in reserve. We also have a few days of life support left. When re-entering from a low Earth orbit, the deceleration does not produce high G-load levels. However, in our case, we are entering from deep space at a very high velocity. To minimize G-load levels, the re-entry angle is steep enough to orbit Earth, but not steep enough to touch down on the surface. We will actually enter the atmosphere twice in order to keep G-loads from killing our Kerbal knots. We have prevented a flyby of Earth. Soon we will escape the atmosphere and orbit the Earth one last time. Notice we are now gaining altitude. We are heading back around for another re-entry. This is a pretty cool shot of both North and South America. We can finally touch down on the surface. Our G-load levels will be minimal. Notice we haven't prevented a third re-entry yet. Let's have a quick review. The total mission time from launching the crew from Earth to re-entering Earth's atmosphere and touching down was about 2 years and 306 days. If I was in career mode, this mission would have cost just under 1.1 million funds. When the mothership was in low Earth orbit with the crew on board, its mass was just over 330 tons. From the time I began designing my spacecraft, testing different scenarios, and finally executing and completing the mission, I had spent about 26 calendar days, or around 50 man-hours. I can divide the biggest challenges into two categories. The first category are challenges that required lots of time to design and test. These include leaving the Martian surface with enough delta V, a very thin Martian atmosphere, and subtle design tweaks that would cascade and introduce new problems. The second category are challenges that required me to reload saved games multiple times. These include docking a very heavy spacecraft, rendezvousing in orbit, especially when the target is not in a circular orbit or I have a limited amount of fuel, and finally, entering an atmosphere at just the right angle to prevent a flyby and also prevent a touchdown on the surface. I haven't figured out how to calculate re-entry angles yet. I just guessed a lot and tried again if I failed. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry about the monotonic and mechanical voice and equally dry jokes. Thanks for watching.